I live in a country in North Africa. My name shall stay anonymous if that is okay with you. My story starts when I was 8. My family and I moved from the house I was born into a new house a little outside the capital. My father had a new job there and he hated the crowds and the pollution, so as a result, he chose to commute every day instead of living in the city. We were not poor but we were not rich either. I belong to a Muslim family. I am a boy and have 2 older sisters who shall remain nameless too. When we were picking out the rooms, my parents decided that my 2 sisters, 11 and 14 years old, would share a room and I would get a whole room for myself. My teenage sister hated that, when I was getting my stuff in order. I found a very old book in one of the closets. It was written in Arabic, which I was able to read, but I couldn't read or understand this one. So I thought to myself maybe this is very advanced for me. And decided to put in my drawer and keep on organizing. We didn't have the internet at the house back then. Because it was brand new and we needed to wait for technicians to come and install it, which could take quite some time, the house was calm, and we all enjoyed the green spaces in the backyard. For the next few days, my father would teach me to ride a bike there and my sisters would each do what they like in there. My older sister used to wait until there was nobody there to disrupt her peace, then go sit there by herself. I remember that I saw her cry one day, and when I went out to comfort her she snapped at me. Wiped out her tears quickly, and then went back to her room and shut the doors. I understood that she didn't want anyone to see that she was not happy about us moving down there. A few weeks after that, school started, and I was so anxious about meeting new people there and what they would think of me. My old sister took my other sister and me to our respective schools. When I got there, the kids were looking at me differently. I got in with a smile even though I was very stressed out. I got to the principal's office and presented myself gently. They welcomed me and took me to my classroom. In the middle of the class, a kid reached out to me and asked, "Are you the family who lived in the house?" He sounded interested as if he was asking about something very specific. "Is it true that it is haunted?" he asked again. I looked at him and asked back what haunted even meant. He asked me if I saw or heard something weird in the house, so I said no and turned back. He stopped asking. At the end of the class, 2 more kids came to me and asked with the same look, "What is it like?" I kept looking at them without really understanding what they meant. Instead of replying to their question, I smiled and presented myself, and so did they. We hung out until my sister stopped by to take me. I told her what they were asking about and asked her what the word haunted meant, implying that one of the kids said that about our house. She had a weird look on her face as if she was realizing something out, but she kept her mouth shut the whole way home. There we found the internet technicians talking to my father, who was home early. They fixed the internet issue. I said hi, and went inside where I found my mom smiling at us like something very exciting was waiting for us. "Your father has something very exciting for the 3 of you," she said with her beautiful smile. My father stopped her. "Not now. After dinner," he said with a strict but gentle tone. After dinner, my middle sister asked about the surprise, so my dad stood up, washed his hand, and went upstairs without saying a word. The suspense was piling up. Everyone was stressed and anxious, except for Mom. He came back with a large box in his hands and put it on the coffee table. He let my older sister opening it up. She started unwrapping the plastic while he stood there watching us all. It was a laptop. My older sister was very happy about it. "I got that for the 3 of you 2 days after we moved in. But I waited until we got internet. Use it well. And I don't want any fighting over it. Your older sister would use it first since she would need it more. As for the rest of you, you are each allowed to use it 1 hour a day after school." We went running to him and hugged him. My father was a strict man, but he had never been harsh on any of us. That night, I asked for my sister's permission to use the laptop for a few minutes. The first thing I did on it was to look for the word haunted. Many articles have appeared about stories of haunted houses. My eyes came across one article that said haunted house, my house is frequented by a ghost. I got scared but even more curious to know more. I kept looking for stories and testimonials about haunted houses. That night, when I got into my bed, I had a bad feeling. Like something was off in my room. As if someone was watching me. I went to my parents' room and knocked. My dad opened the door and asked what was wrong, and I told him that I was scared. He took me by the hand and took me back to my room. "You are a man now, there is nothing that could scare you." He started reciting some verses from the Holy Quran, trying to make me repeat after him. "You are safe now and God is looking after you," he said with a confident voice before standing up, covering me, and going back to his room. I wasn't scared anymore, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. I started looking at the ceiling and then remembered the book in my drawer. I lit up the lights, took it out, and tried to read its name. It was in Arabic, but I think the exact translation to English would be the Son of Knowledge. After I opened it, the soft light of my room went out for a few seconds, and then came back. I felt weird. The fear came back. I was trying to read the content of the book. It started in the name of Allah. I thought it might be a religious book. But I couldn't read nor understand what came after that. I decided that I will tell my sisters about it and then see what happens. That was the thought in my mind at that moment. But I felt that something inside me wanted to read that book. It had this aura that I still can't explain. I sneaked out of my room, to the living room where the laptop was. I felt a weird presence in the corridors of the house. And not a soothing one. After opening the computer, I searched for the name of the book, hoping that someone could explain the language in which it was written. As I kept navigating the result of my search, I found out that it was a book about something called dark magic, which might help you summon demons, and that it is strictly forbidden to use it by our Muslim community. All of this made me make links in my mind about what happened at school and the stories about the house. I decided that I should look up more information about the house. As that thought crossed my mind, the book was opened by itself on page 6. I was terrified and felt a presence near me. I got closer to the book to check how it opened up on that page. The surprise was that I was able to read and understand the meaning of those words. He who reads these words, shall now be the owner of the book and its powers. The owner shall summon, speak to and see different demons when following the steps for each demon. They should serve you as long as you give them what they asked for in return. I turned the page, and I found some very strange drawings and tables I couldn't quite understand at first. Yet, something whispered in my ears that I could easily read them if I wanted to. That presence was felt higher and more intensely. It then stroked me. I could read the words. Does it mean that the book is now mine? I can now summon demons. I stopped reading as I heard a door open upstairs. Nobody was supposed to know I was awake. I closed the laptop and sneaked back into my room. Laid in my bed, thinking about everything that book could bring us. A week after that night, I decided to ask more about the stories of the house. My friends at school were the perfect place to start. I asked the first one after class. If nothing weird happens, you should just forget about it. After all, they are just stories. He said. But that answer was not enough. So I kept asking. My grandmother, God bless her soul, told me that in your house lived a man who practiced dark magic. He helped people realize their most twisted desires by using some demons he worked with. He also used to make some special kinds of ceremonies that the demons wanted, along with some sacrifices and a special kind of music. He said with fear in his eyes. I could tell that he believed in every word he said. I, on the other hand, was curious and excited in some way. This person who lived in your house before you was found dead a few years back in the most horrific of ways. He continued. My grandmother never wanted to tell me how he died. All she ever said about his death was that he was found petrified, eyes and mouth open as if he'd seen something that terrified him. After that day, we went home. My sister was in the backyard like every day after school, sitting there with her headset on. Sad as ever. Even though I was the youngest, I couldn't help but feel concerned about her. I knew she was never a big talker, but we at least always had the chance to see her beautiful smile. I went to the backyard. She didn't hear me come from behind. To avoid scaring her, I came from the front. She removed her headset and asked if something was wrong. Her eyes were red as if she was crying. It was the first time I'd ever felt so helpless. I got closer to her and then hugged her without saying a word, hoping that this would comfort her. I lay on the grass and put my head on her legs while looking at her. I got a glimpse of that smile back. As I was laying there, my sight caught a man in my room, looking at us from the window of my room. And as I blinked, he was gone. I was terrified of what I had just seen. Especially when I know that my father won't be back for 2 more hours. I went straight up to my room to see who it was. To my big surprise, the room was empty, and the book I kept in my drawer was on the desk, open on the page I left it on. I sat there and tried to see what that page contains. The first words written on that page were, "To avoid negative repercussions, the content of that page should in no way be read in the presence of someone other than the book's owner." I kept reading out loud. It contained some weird words that I couldn't understand. Some names were repeated more than once. I couldn't stop reading even when I wanted to. I felt like the whole house was trembling down. I kept reading until it all stopped and I reached the part that said, "He is here now. Ask what you want. And don't forget his price." Something changed very fast in the room. The room temperature dropped surprisingly low. My heart started to beat a lot faster as I felt a presence behind me. I turned and found the same man who was looking at my sister and me from the window. He had a long beard, wearing an old Moroccan dress, and had a creepy smile on his face. "You are the new owner of the book," he said in a deep and aggressive voice. "What do you want?" he asked. I was terrified of him and how he showed up. I could barely open my mouth or think of something I want. And then my sister came to my mind. I wanted to be happy, so I asked, "Could you make my oldest sister happier?" He nodded his head and faded. The room temperature went slowly back to normal. I enjoyed that brief moment of peace until I heard the voice of my mother in the backyard, screaming. She was calling for my oldest sister in a panic. I look out the window, and there she is walking towards the woods that were half a mile far from our house. She seemed to be unconscious. I ran out of my room to get down and try to catch her. She got very fast very far. I kept running towards her. The first big trees of the woods started showing up. And as she got there she faded away. I looked behind every tree and every place where she could probably be hiding. The sun was setting down and the woods were getting darker and scarier. I felt watched by some kind of entity that I couldn't see. The time went on as I was looking. It was very dark. I could hardly see where I put my feet. However, my sight caught a shadow moving between the trees. I kept calling my sister's name hoping that it was her. But no answer. I was terrified. I was overwhelmed by all the emotions I had at that exact moment until I heard a familiar sound shouting my name and my sister's. It was my father alongside some of our neighbors. Once they found me, my father hugged me and asked about my sister. I said that I didn't know where she is. My father was worried sick about my sister. We kept looking for hours. I was tired and hungry. Yet there was no chance in hell I would leave without finding my sister. While we were looking in the dark, using lanterns and flashlights, I saw a silhouette watching us from afar. It was not clear what it was. But something about it felt wrong. The barking of our neighbor's dog interrupted my worries until I saw he was barking in the same direction. I kept looking there until that silhouette moved its head as if it leans to the side to say hi. A hand sat on my shoulder. It was my father, sadly looking at me, saying that we should go home to see if, hopefully, My sister went there. As I turned back to see that silhouette, it faded away. The dog was still barking. We got home by sunrise. My mother was waiting for us by the door and started crying as soon as she saw us without my sister. My father consoled her and told her that he wasn't going to work and he will go back to look for her. As he got inside the house, the phone started ringing. My mum ran in to answer and she found that on the other line was my sister's friend's mother. My mother sounded relieved for a minute. Then worried again. We waited until the phone call ended and my mother said that my sister went to her friend's house. And the mother said that my sister was acting weird, when my parents brought her back in the evening. She was acting very cold around everyone. I tried to hug her but she didn't hug me back. Her looks were different. A completely different person. Later that day, we were having dinner together except for my oldest sister who was sitting alone in her room since she got back, until we heard a very loud scream coming from upstairs. It was my sister's voice. We went up there running to see if she was okay. For a moment there, my father couldn't open the door. He started calling her, asking if she was okay, and asking her to open the door for us to check up on her. But no response. He broke the door down, and to our biggest surprise, we found my sister laying on her back and floating over her bed. My father started reciting some verses of the Holy Quran as he was trying to hold her down. It seemed to make her even worse. She opened her eyes wider than I'd ever seen. Started screaming very loud in a man's voice. We couldn't understand what she was saying. My father never stopped reading. He did it with such faith that it would cure her. But at a certain moment, the voice started to laugh at the words he was reading from the Quran. He then stopped and asked me to run to the mosque in the neighborhood and get the imam to come and help him. On the way with the imam, I told him what happened to my sister, and also about the man/demon that appeared to me because of the book. He stopped and seemed concerned. Then we might need some assistance. He answered with a worried face but a calm tone. We should get someone, he continued. Don't worry, I know who can help us. We stopped by a house that is a little close to ours. He knocked on the door. A very old man answered the door. He had a very weird aura. Very comforting presence though he hadn't said a word yet. He smiled at me when he saw me, then asked the imam if there is anything he could help with. He explained the situation, and without hesitation, the old man asked us to wait for him. After a few minutes, he came back, closed his door behind him, and started walking with us. He asked me about the book and I told him everything I know. He asked me about what I'd asked from the demon and what he asked in return. After all the details, he smiled at me and said, "You are very brave, son. Not everyone can say no to demons." When we got home, we could hear the screaming from outside. The voice was a lot louder than I remember. The imam and I were even more concerned about my family and what had happened to them. But the old man walked confidently towards the door, put his hands on it, and said, "In the name of Allah." The screaming stopped and the door opened. He turned his head to the imam and said, "Come on, mister, we have work to do." They both walked in, and as I was going in, the old man stopped me and asked me to go fetch where the demon came from. I understood that he meant the book, so I went to my room after I showed him my sister's room. I brought the book and went back to see my father sitting on the ground, heavily breathing, while my mom and sister were terrified in the corner watching the imam and the old guy have a staring contest with my sister or the demon with me. After that, the imam stood up and said, "In the name of Allah, I will start healing you." The demon exploded in laughter as if he didn't care about what the imam was going to do. The old man, meanwhile, was calmly and softly reading some verses of the Quran on a bottle of water. The imam could barely focus on his part because of all the laughter. When the old man finished his mission, he stood up with that bottle in his hand and the demon immediately stopped laughing. A severe face was drawn on my sister. She started screaming at him again and tried to stand up to attack him. But with the first drops of that water on her body she lay back in agony. He took some of that water in his hand, and then put it on her forehead. She immediately started screaming again, but in pain this time. The Imam joined too, clearly with a lot more confidence this time. They started reading the same parts of the Quran. The more they read, the weakest that thing in my sister got. The old man looked up and saw me standing at the door. He asked me to give him the book. Once he held it, my sister opened her eyes widely as if she feared what would happen next. He then spilled some of the water on the book and my sister started screaming again. A loud growling sound came from my sister as if there was a loose angry dog ready to attack. The old man was completely confident about what he was doing, and no sign of distress appeared on him as the tension got high and the demon was more threatening. The Imam, with a hand on my sister's forehead, repeated the same verses repeatedly, louder whenever the demon got ready to jump on the old man. The louder he recited, the louder the growling got. After the pages got all wet, the old man looked up to my sister who looked a lot weaker but had a smug smile on her face. It was obvious that the demon had a few tricks up his sleeves. He laughed at the old man and the Imam, then looked at me. He had a challenging look before he started mumbling. "You started this. Boy. You started it. Now you can't finish it." And starts laughing again. The Imam got angry at the laughing and starts reciting again before the old man stops him. "Let me take from here," he said. We could see the demon get more serious as the old man approaches. "Isa, I see you're back on your promise," mumbled the demon. He knew who the old man was. But I was curious about the secret he was talking about. The old man was surprisingly calm and wasn't answering the demon's provocations. He took out a small book from his pocket and calmly opens it. He starts looking at my sister's face before starting to read some sentences from the book that I couldn't understand. As he started screaming, the demon starts swearing again, but this time it was all oriented to Isa. He mentioned the old man's wife who, in the demon's words, passed away during her pregnancy during a fire that went on while Isa was doing his last exorcism. The demon was repeating the story expecting the old man would react. It was a sad story, about how the old Imam was out helping an innocent family, a victim of jinn's attacks in the same house we live in, while they target his small family and lit fire to the whole place, causing the mother and her unborn child to suffocate and burn alive. We were all stunned by how horrific the story was, but not the Imam and the old man, who were not even close to being touched nor showed no reaction and kept on going. After a while, the swearing stopped, and we could hear my sister breathing heavily. "Mom? Dad?" we heard, in my sister's voice. My father jumped to go to my sister, but the old man asked him to stop as he had one thing left to do before being sure the demon has left her body. He took one other bottle filled with water. Holy water. He made my sister drink it, and after a few seconds, she started vomiting something black and smelly, pieces of hair, and small pieces of folded paper. After that, the Imam and Isa smiled and thanked God for my sister's soul. They looked at my mother and asked them to have a closer look and see if everything was fine with her. My father wanted to pay the Imam and the old man for their troubles, but they seemed to get mad at him for that. The old man took him aside and told him to keep his money and to call him whenever something strange like that happens again. The Imam waited his turn to smile at my father and tell him to accompany them to the mosque for Al-Far. My sister fell asleep as they were talking. Many hours went by, and my sister woke up from her long sleep. It was her again. And I thanked God for that. I was grounded for a month for using that book without telling anybody, but I didn't care as long as my sister was doing all right. That was my story, and thank you for sharing it on your channel Terror in the Night.